Do you like scary stories? Do you want to know the secrets that have been hidden for centuries? Welcome to Haunting Hour. I am Haunting Hour. I am going to tell you such ghostly, mysterious, and suspenseful stories that will send shivers down your spine. Here you will find true incidents of haunted places, terrifying love stories, and unsolved mysteries. If you dare, be a part of this journey. Subscribe, watch the video, and immerse yourself in the world of fear. Are you ready for this mystery-filled journey? It was nighttime. The road was deserted. There was only dense darkness all around. Gusts of cold wind were blurring the glass panes of the car. John was returning home after a long journey. There was fatigue in his eyes, but there was peace in his heart that he would be able to meet his wife and child soon. Their photos were kept on the dashboard of his car, as if giving him courage to reach home. He was bringing a beautiful gift for the birthday of his younger son, Jack. On the way, he called his wife. "I will reach home in just an hour. Tell Jack that Papa's coming." His wife's laughter was echoing on the other side of the phone, but perhaps she did not know how horrific the end of this journey was going to be. John was driving his car when suddenly he applied brakes after seeing a girl standing on the side of the road. The girl was in a white gown, her hair was disheveled, and her face looked nervous. John took his head out of the window. "Are you okay?" But as soon as the girl looked at him, there was a strange shine in her eyes. And then, she started floating in the air. John's eyes were wide open. His heart started pounding. Before he could understand anything, the girl let out a terrible scream and suddenly disappeared. The next moment, the engine of his car stopped on its own. Everything had stopped, as if time had stopped breathing. John started turning the ignition of the car with trembling hands, but the car was not starting. His breathing became fast. Sweat appeared on his forehead. Then he heard his wife laughing. But that laughter was coming from inside his car. He turned back quickly, and what he saw made tears flow from his eyes. His wife and son were sitting in the back seat, but blood was dripping from their eyes. Jack's face had the same birthday happiness, but there were deep wounds all over his body. John's scream got stuck in his throat. "How did you both come here?" John asked in a trembling voice. But his wife and son were just smiling, as if trying to say something. John got out of the car in panic, and as he looked back, the view of the road had changed. There was no road there now, just a deserted cemetery. There were burnt names written on the graves, and on one grave was written, John Miller, 1978 to 2024. John's breath stopped. That grave was his own. But he was alive, wasn't he? His eyes started to darken. Then the same horrifying scream of the girl echoed again, and the same spirit in the white gown was standing in front of John. This time her face was distorted. Her eyes had become completely black. She raised her sharp nails towards John and said, "You can't go from here alive." The last time John was seen falling into his own grave. But was he really dead? What happened to his spirit? And who was that spirit in the white gown? Was it a cursed spirit, or was it some other big mystery? It was a cold night. There was a thick darkness all around. John's eyes opened slowly. His breathing was fast. His heart was beating uncontrollably. When he looked around, he was still in the same deserted cemetery. But there was something strange. His own grave standing in front of him had now disappeared. Was it a dream or something else? He remembered the smiles of his wife and son, their bloodshot eyes, and then that horrifying scream. John realized that he had seen something he could never forget. John gathered courage and stood up and tried to run away from there, but his steps seemed to be tied. Suddenly, there was a strange movement in the air. Rustling sounds started coming from all around, as if someone was moving around him. And then, someone put a hand on his shoulder from behind. John's hair stood on end. He slowly looked back, and that white gowned spirit was standing in front of him again. But this time, she was not alone. There were many more figures behind her, with red eyes and decayed bodies. They slowly started moving towards John. John tried to run, but his foot hit a tombstone, and he fell to the ground. He looked down suddenly, and what he saw brought tears to his eyes. The tombstone had the names of his wife and son engraved on it. Alice Miller, 1982 to 2024, and Jack Miller, 2015 to 2024. John's heart sank. He wanted to scream, but the voice got stuck in his throat. No, this can't be true. Tears began to flow from his eyes. He fell to the ground, hands folded and sobbing. Tell me, this is a lie. Alice, Jack, you two are alive, right? But there was no answer. The ground in the cemetery began to shake. The spirits standing around John suddenly drew back, as if sensing someone else's presence. Then a shadow emerged from the darkness, tall, scary, and completely black. John widened his eyes. The shadow said in a deep, echoing voice, "You're not John Miller." John was stunned. What? What nonsense are you talking about? You can't escape from here. You're dead. John put his hands on the ground, his heart thumping. This can't be true. I'm alive. I'm alive. The shadow reached out and touched John's face. Suddenly, he felt something strange inside him. His memories started to flash, and then he saw a horrifying scene. His car was lying badly crashed on that same cursed highway. His body was bleeding, and his wife and son were burning inside the car. So was John really dead, or was he suffering from a dangerous hallucination? Who was the dark shadow that questioned his reality? And the biggest question of all, if John was dead, how was he still here? John's face had turned pale amidst the dense darkness. He was lying on the ground, with countless questions in his eyes. On one side were the graves of his wife and son, and on the other side was the shadow which was questioning his existence. But there was something else in John's memories. He was returning home to celebrate Jack's birthday. He had promised his wife that he would return home safely. Then what happened that he himself was standing in front of his own grave? Tears started flowing from his eyes. No, this cannot be true. I promised Jack. The shadow slowly moved towards him. Suddenly, John felt cold, but it was not any ordinary cold. It was the cold of death. The shadow said in a cold, echoing voice, "Your journey ends here, John." No, John said, trembling. He tried to convince himself that it was a nightmare, but just then, his breath stopped. He tried to look at his reflection on the ground, but there was nothing there. John's reflection had disappeared. How is this possible? John stuttered. The shadow laughed, but it was not a human laugh. Because you are no longer human. John's body went numb. He wanted to run, but it seemed as if there was no strength left in his legs. The scene flashed before his eyes. A burnt car, a blood-soaked steering wheel, and the screams of his wife and son. He remembered everything. He was really dead. No, this can't be true. Tears started flowing from John's eyes. His whole body was shaking. He fell to the ground and started crying loudly. I promised Jack. I can't leave him alone. But his voice was lost in the silence. The shadow moved forward and placed a hand on John's head. Suddenly, another scene flashed before his eyes. It was a strange place, a dark forest with a broken bridge in the middle. There was someone else there, someone who was there before John's death, a man whose face was hidden in the darkness. He was standing there watching John's accident. You didn't die alone, John, the shadow said. So, who else was there? John asked, trembling. The shadow said nothing, but another shadow began to emerge in the darkness, this time a human's. Who was that other man who was there at the time of John's accident? Was his death just an accident, or was there some sinister conspiracy behind it? And the biggest question, if John was dead, how could he still feel? John stood in the pitch darkness, images of his own death flashing before his eyes. A burning car, the screams of his wife and son, and a stranger hiding there watching everything. He couldn't understand if all this was reality or an illusion. Was he really dead? If yes, then why was he still here? There was a storm of questions within him, but there was no answer. Tears were falling from his eyes, but they were disappearing before reaching the ground, as if he had now become a part of another world. Suddenly, a strange echo echoed in the air. The shadow slowly began to materialize, and now John could see his face. It was none other than John Miller himself. How is this possible? John asked tremblingly. The shadow smiled. Because you are no longer the same as you were before? Your body is dead, but your soul is still wandering. But why? There was pain in John's eyes. If I'm dead, why am I being stopped here? The shadow raised its hand in the air, and suddenly a horrifying scene appeared before John. He was on the same cursed highway again, but this time something had changed. There was his own grave on the side of the road, and next to it was another grave, on which was written, Jason Collins, 1980 to 2024. Who is Jason Collins? John asked nervously. The shadow replied in a cold voice, the man who killed you. John's breath stopped. Meaning, my death was not an accident? Now the whole incident started playing again in front of John. That night when he was returning to his home, another car had chased him. It was Jason Collins, a killer who had killed many people on the highway. He had pushed John's car, causing it to fall into a ditch and catch fire. Jason saw all this happen, but he ran away from there. No one stopped him, and John's death was treated as a simple accident. So what can I do now? John asked in despair. The shadow smiled. Your soul will be free only when Jason is punished for his crimes. John now understood his purpose. He was now a soul, but his journey was not over. He gathered all his strength and set out in search of Jason. 3 days later, one night Jason was passing through the same highway when suddenly his car's engine stopped. It was pitch dark all around, and there was a strange silence in the air. Then he heard someone walking from behind. He looked back, but there was no one there. Then suddenly drops of blood started dripping on the glass of his car. Jason's heart started beating fast. Then a voice echoed on his car radio. Jason, your time is up. And then with a loud scream, his car overturned. The next morning when the police reached there, they found Jason dead. After Jason died, John's soul finally found peace. He looked at the photo of his wife and son for the last time, and slowly his soul began to turn into light. His spirit was free. The message of this story was clear. Evil is doomed, no matter what form it takes. A man creates his own destiny through his own actions.